All right. Hello, everyone. I think we're waiting for a few folks to join, and we're going to kick things off and get started here. I am Sarah Strope. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at QuotaPath and also Head of Customer Success at QuotaPath. For those of you who are new to QuotaPath, a quick background on who we are and what we do. QuotaPath is a sales compensation platform to help you automate running commissions and managing commissions. And we do that for all the key stakeholders in a revenue team, from your sales reps to your sales leadership to working with your RevOps and finance teams. We provide expert guidance in developing comp plans and then help you automatically track your commissions and run your payroll process. I'm really excited to be here with a group of esteemed leaders, experts who've made their career in sales, from individual contributors through sales leadership and executive leadership. And before we get started, let's dive into a little bit about why are we even here today with the Women in Sales team. So, there are a couple of really alarming statistics. And yes, this session will be recorded and we will be sharing it. So a couple quick housekeeping tips. Yes, I was going to hand things over to Alexine in just a moment. Women in Sales will be recording this and sharing this out across their platform afterwards. So look forward to your participation and being able to share that with your friends and colleagues after the call. So diving into kind of why we're here and talking today, there are a couple of really, frankly, alarming statistics about women in sales and kind of equity and compensation. A recent study showed us that men earn 2 times the amount of commissions as women per sale. And what this means over time is that saleswomen report earning 23% less than men in total commissions and compensation. So how did we get here? A lot of the times it has to do with kind of 2 factors. One is inequitable compensation plans. So we're going to talk a little bit today, for those of you in leadership, about how to build more equitable compensation plans. Another part is, how do we all negotiate better? What are some tactics that we can do to make sure that we're evaluating the right parts of our compensation plans, that we're asking the right questions, and we're negotiating for ourselves? So I'm really excited to be joined today by Alexine, Daisy, and Christina. And we're going to talk about exactly that: how to evaluate your sales compensation package, how to negotiate, how to create more equitable plans overall. And then we'll close out today's discussion with a couple of tips about how to build confidence and competence, and even kind of what's the difference between the two. So we'll leave you with a couple good nuggets there. So let's dive in. You already heard who I am from QuotaPath, and let's kick it off to Alexine. I'd love to start with you as our host from Women in Sales. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes, absolutely. I'll hit this on 2 fronts. So really quick here, just wanted to thank again everyone for joining. My name is Alexine Moudouar. I'm CEO of Women in Sales. We are formally partnered with QuotaPath. So we are so excited to do this event today. And we love working with their team because we want to talk about all things money and make sure that women in our field are being paid equitably. And so this is just something that's really close to our hearts, and a partnership that makes total sense. And my background is I spent the last, I think I'm nearing 11 years. I keep saying 10 plus, 11 years in enterprise B2B SaaS sales. I started as an account executive, and I basically stayed as an account executive, very much in a hunter role, and love enterprise sales, love talking to customers. And as of end of last year, have moved full-time into my CEO role now. So I'm still in sales, spoiler alert, but I absolutely love sales and I wouldn't do anything else.
I think never stop selling is really your motto.
Yes.
Awesome. Daisy, let's go over to you.
Awesome. My name is Daisy. I've been in software sales for the last 8 years, both IC roles and management roles. Started my career off as an SDR, then went to SDR leadership, then went back to the IC role as an AE, and then AE leadership. And being in sales for all these years, money, compensation has always been a fun, important topic, whichever end you're on. And so really excited to dive deep today on tips, best practices, and how we can all learn from each other.
And Christina.
Awesome. I am Christina Brady. I'm the SVP of sales at Speckit. I have been bouncing around the B2B technology space for 15 plus years. I'm like, it's a little, we're just going to say 15. Currently, I've been able to run orgs that are close to $1 billion. I've been able to run orgs that are in the mid millions. And right now I'm having a lot of fun working in hyper growth startups and all of the amazing things that come along with that. And then also all of the difficult things that come along with that, right? As part of the journey. And so I'm just excited to be here and having this really important conversation.
I am already so excited based on all of your backgrounds about how we're going to be able to tap into those experiences from going from IC to leader and back to IC and to leader again, and going from big company to smaller startup. So it's such a rich dynamic experience that we'll get to tap into. So let's dive right in. Let's say that you're thinking about a time in your career when you were an individual contributor. Daisy, I'm thinking about you in your first SDR role, or Alexine, as an AE. Let's start with, what are some of the green flags that you looked for and some of the red flags that gave you pause when you received a compensation plan?
Yes, I'm happy to kick off here. So back when I was a rep and when I started out initially, I think some green flags were that if the comp plan is very detailed, so there's specific numbers and metrics tied to it. So when it says bonus, commission, or base, there's an actual number tied to it. And on the other side, a red flag would be if someone just says, here's your base, there's an actual number, and we have bonuses once a year or bonuses twice a year. There's no specific amount tied to it. It's very vague. That's when I think there are some red flags that can delve deeper with the company with. So first and foremost, the details are really important, and also ensuring that there are multiple things in the compensation. If it just says one number, a base number, then that's a pretty red flag. I like to dive into base, into commission, into the commission structure. There should be percentages and benchmarks and accelerators and things like that, along with bonuses, equity. And this is a +1. I don't see this in a lot of comp plan, but even if there's a path to show what promotion looks like, the more details, the more I understand this company is transparent, cares about compensation and what's structured. And that's when I see all the green flag signals.
Fantastic. So it's really that the devil's in the details. Like, in order for you to excel, you need to know exactly how you're going to get there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I think for me, I agree with everything Daisy said. You just hit like an awesome list of everything. But for me, when I'm going into those conversations, there shouldn't be any surprises. If I've done a good job, if I have asked the right questions, there should be no surprises when I look at that sheet of paper. Like, the quota should be in line with what we've discussed. The commission rates should be in line with what we discussed. Like, there shouldn't be any like curveball numbers. I think that's where I see like red flags, is all of a sudden it's like, hey, good news, we met your OTE ask, but by the way, all that your quota is now going to be 500K higher. And then now we have to go back to the drawing board and does this match with what the team is actually mapping to today? So I think just understanding and making sure that everything we've talked about in conversations makes sense. I don't know if this is just me, but when I have any kind of money conversation, whether it's a closing conversation, whether it's compensation, whether it's me negotiating internally when I already work for a company, I have those conversations face to face, whether it's Zoom, in person. I want to see and read the energy of the person. So a really good green flag for me is also just paying close attention to who I'm talking to, especially knowing that oftentimes that's being delivered by who my future leader is going to be. I want to see that like what we talked about is what's being put in front of me. And what I love to see is when they bake a little something extra in, like, hey, I remembered from our conversation that you mentioned you used to have this kicker for X number of logos closed. So I added a little something. Like, I think I love things like that, where they actually took something away and fluffed it into there. And it doesn't have to be big money, but it means something to me. So that'd be my vision.
Two things I'm hearing, Alexine, you're mentioning that they listened to you and thought about what motivates you, and Daisy, that idea of like showing the promotion path. So the compensation plan shouldn't just be for where you are today, but it should actually reflect kind of what's made you successful and where they know you want to go.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I'm going to add anything onto this, and I could not agree more with Daisy and Alexine. For me, I've often had to think about some of the nuances between like a job offer and a quota plan and a comp plan, because in a lot of instances they are very, very different. So I've seen many times where a job offer will just have the OTE listed and maybe some of the equity or non-cash comp or perks or benefits. And like your job offer won't always have your quota on it, right? And so then if you go back and ask, like the company may not know that yet, right? So it's like, how do we ask about what are the differences between the offer I'm receiving versus my comp plan? Because comp plan is typically outside of the job offer and the OTE. How do we actually get you to that bonus piece? So understanding the differences between each and what should be on there. And the second piece is I'm not always so worried about what's on there. Like I am, but I'm worried about what's not on there, right? What I'm worried about are, what does your performance management process look like? What does your regrettable versus non-regrettable attrition look like? How many people in the organization are currently making their on-target earnings? What kind of coaching and learning do you have available for reps who are performing and reps who are underperforming? Things like that really matter, because you can be dazzled by an amazing comp plan only to find out that the majority of people are only hitting 50% of that plan. And you could accidentally take a gigantic pay cut by just not understanding the nuances. I would ask about the prior employee review cadences and what those looked like and what employee sentiment was. Things like that. So you really understand, like, what am I joining and what am I getting into? Because it's so much more than just what is sitting on the piece of paper. It's, I'm going to be spending minutes of my life and a lot of time of my life away from my loved ones, away from myself, away from my children. Am I going to be happy here? Am I going to thrive here? Are other people happy here and thriving here? How many people are promoted internally? Questions like that really make you make a life decision versus just a quick, hey, that number looks really good. I really like that number. I'm going to jump on that number, right? There's so much more that actually goes into it.
That's great. And so interesting hearing these questions to ask or, you know, thinking about what you didn't ask. So when you were a rep, how often, give me like a rough estimate, how often did you negotiate your comp plan?
God, I'm going to kick it off because my first job as an AE in tech, because I sold outside of tech previously. I was an insurance salesperson. I was a financial planner, if you look at my licensing. But selling insurance is very, very different than the SaaS world that I think a lot of us are in. First plan I got, I thought it was like the most money I'd ever made in my life. Like this was like 2007, right? Right as like everything is bursting, and I get this. I remember my very first compensation plan was with Groupon in 2000. It was 2000, early 2000s, no, mid to late 2000s. And it was a $35,000 base. I know, before you blow out of your seat. And then $35,000 commission. And I was like, I'm rich. Like I had never thought about making money like that guaranteed before. So to be honest, and I think a lot of people, you don't always negotiate your first offer. Like you get it and you're like, this is cool, like awesome. And then you jump in and you learn, and you either learn for the good or you learn for the bad. I actually did not learn how to negotiate for my comp plan and my job offer until my first promotion at Groupon, and then subsequently like jobs after that, like at Glassdoor and so on. So for me, it was like, I think most people, you get the offer and you're like, great, awesome, thanks for that, you know, because things like this didn't exist. Right? There was no forum like this to tell me to negotiate my offer. I didn't know. Yeah.
Right. Daisy,
Yeah.
I've seen similar stories, or were you negotiating from day one and every day since?
Okay, I feel like mine's an interesting answer because I feel like I was like a savage out the gates, like year one. And then there was like a lull in the middle. And then at the end, I was like savage again. There was like this little break where I just said, whatever, I'll just take it. So yeah, at the beginning, I started with, I think it was 30K, and then I got bumped to 35, and I was elated. I was so excited. And that was my very first year in sales. And so when I got that, I was like, I actually tried to, so at the time, my first year in sales, I scratched around $200,000. So I had a huge jump out the gates. I made a lot of money really fast, and I was working nonstop. But I actually tried to negotiate to get rid of my base and take like a slight percentage bump in commission, which I was shut down. But I give myself props for like having the creativity at like 22 to think of that. So that was like my first foray. I definitely somewhere in the middle, again, to Christina's point, I just didn't have like the resources or wherewithal or knowledge. And there was like some shame behind it too. It was like, am I too greedy if I ask for money? So I had like a lull of a couple years where I just didn't really negotiate well at all. And then really like the last few roles, I was like back in it again. And what I, one thing that I did, if this is helpful to other people who are kind of uncomfortable, initially what I would do is if I'm not going to be totally comfortable just like straight up asking for cash, what I started to do was like list out all the stuff that I needed. Like I needed a really strong education budget. I'm a big conference goer. So I was like, I need an education budget. If it's PTO, if I have requests for like career coaching, these other things. So I started to make like lists of things. So that way, for me at least, it didn't feel like I was like asking for cash, like especially at that point where I was feeling uncomfortable. It was like, I'm not even asking for me. I'm asking for the betterment of how I'm going to show up as a rep for your team. And that was like a nice little like connective tissue into starting to negotiate for cash to where I am today, where I could just ask for that money and be really comfortable.
Daisy, how about you?
Yeah, I'd say when I first started negotiating at my first entry-level job, I was kind of in between Christina and Alexine, where I did negotiate, but I didn't have all the levers. So I did one of those like negotiate because you're supposed to negotiate, which doesn't come off as genuine because everyone hears this conversation. Well, I think I should be, I need more than this. So one of those where I didn't come with a bunch of data, I was presented my offer, entry-level SDR job 8 years ago. So my offer was, I believe 45,000 base. And also I had zero experience, best offer I've ever received. Very similar to Christina. I was very ecstatic, but I knew you're supposed to negotiate. So I asked for more. And as a negotiator who didn't know what I was supposed to do, I just said, oh, okay, thank you for the offer. I appreciate it. I'm actually looking for more. I didn't give them a number. I didn't have data to back it up. And fortunately, I did get more. I got 3K more. They gave me 48K. Which I took. So being a junior negotiator, I didn't negotiate more as I just took whatever they gave me because it was more than what was initially offered. And then from there, my first couple of years, I'll be honest, I was firm on negotiating, but I didn't do it with much tact. I was very direct and I would bring it up in the most inopportune scenarios. So now that I'm older and I've been through this multiple times, the best way to negotiate is at the right time because you don't want your boss or manager to feel uncomfortable. You don't want to come at them over and over again for negotiations. I think that you should do it during your review at the right time, at the right moment. And that's when you negotiate for all the marbles. It should be rare that you negotiate, but when you negotiate for everything. So when I first started, I remember the first time I negotiated was actually 3 months into the job. And I was the top rep, top SDR. And SDRs, when you're young, you talk. And I realized that most folks were making more than me because they had SDR experience. I came with no experience. I was the top rep for 3 months. They were changing where everyone was going to do a new inbound, outbound model. And I still remember it was during SKO. They finished telling us our comp plan. I went straight to my director or manager in front of all the other reps and said, I want to talk about compensation. So 1, I made him feel uncomfortable because it was very public. 2, we had a good relationship and I had data because I was a top rep and I got it through. But looking back, I'm sure that it could have been a lot better. I could have not made him uncomfortable and things like that. I think over the time you learn that negotiation is not just you getting what you want, but making your boss, your manager in a comfortable position to help you get there. It's all about win-win. It's not you getting more money, you getting everything. How do you make your boss, your manager look good to make that ask? Because a lot of time it's not like they don't want to give it to you. They have to fight for it and put their name on it. And so it's creating that win-win scenario. And that's what I've learned over the years of negotiating.
I love that. Fantastic lessons in terms of that journey of negotiation, learning, when and how to do it, and then what to look for, which leads us into making sure we all know this new tagline is no longer how to go from good to great, but how to go from softy to savage. I think we will definitely walk away with that. And now let's dig into some of those elements about kind of what should we be negotiating for and really what should we be evaluating in our comp plans. So let's dig into first, what are some of those key elements? And Daisy, you actually started to outline some of that in the detail. So will you walk through that in a little bit more about what are some of those elements? And then we'll jump into what are those follow-up questions to ask when you receive and evaluate that comp plan?
Yeah, so we're getting to the nuts and bolts. I think the core piece for sales compensation is the base, the variable. I think what we alluded to earlier is the quota to get to the variable. It's nice if your variable is really big, but that quota attached to it and how reasonable it is will make the difference. And then the exciting piece is accelerators. As a rep, that's where you make the most money, and that piece has to make sense for you to make whatever dollar amount you're looking to make. I say those are the core money pieces. And then from there, you can think about equity, you can think about benefits, insurance plans, you can think about bonuses, you can think about promotion paths and what that looks like. And I say those are the more non-monetary ways to negotiate and look at your comp plan.
Great. So base, and then looking at definitely the accelerators.
Yeah. You're also welcome to ask, what are some of the creative compensation elements that have been offered to folks in my position in the past, right? Like you can come and you can present them, but the company can also offer you an example of some accommodations or negotiation levers that they've used in the past. And I've seen extra PTO or extra volunteer days or, a mental health benefit or extra insurance benefits. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can negotiate for, but also make sure that whatever you're negotiating for is actually meaningful to you, right? Because you can hear a lot of suggestions, but like at the end of the day, for me, like having a monthly help, like I remember one of the ones at a previous organization is just like, well, we don't have XYZ, but we do have monthly gym membership payback program. Right. And I was like, that's super cool. I'm never going to use that. Like, that is like that, like, so part of my negotiation when I was going to that role was, okay, well, what is that stipend? And do I have the flexibility to apply that stipend as something that's meaningful for my life? Like, can I apply that to my Peloton membership? Can I apply that, so it's what are the options that we have? What is the revenue tie to that or the comp tie to that? And then do we have the flexibility for me to repurpose that into a bucket that is meaningful for me and worth it for me to maybe take a lower cash comp or a lower bonus comp because you're supplementing my cell phone bill, you're supplementing my car insurance, you're supplementing my child care, you're supplementing my pet care, right? There's all kinds of things that you can think about that actually would actually be a better payoff because of even how taxes are looked at, right? The money in your paycheck is post-tax, but if you get a benefit that's covered, it's actually saving you more money because it's a pre-tax benefit. So there's a lot of ways to look at how you can play with those levers that wind up translating to, at the end of the day, more money in your pocket. And like, it's okay, especially as women in this space, to say like, I would like more money. And like, that's okay. Unless you're a volunteer, you're allowed to talk about money and wanting to make money, and it doesn't make you greedy and it doesn't make it unfair. It's like women should talk about the fact that I'm in this to make money. And guess what? I want to make a lot of it. That's right. That's my goal. And I can change the world and I can trailblaze, but I'd also like to make a lot of money. Thank you. And that's okay. And we have to get comfortable saying that and supporting it.
Yeah. Being straightforward about it. Back to some of those elements on the variable comp piece too. Alexine, you mentioned in the beginning that you asked for a kicker at one point. Can you talk through like what are some follow-up questions when it comes to the variable comp component that you could get creative on? Christina, you talked about broad pieces that you can get creative in your overall total comp, and then in variable comp, are there elements that you could ask for specifically for you when you're evaluating that plan?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of things. One thing I don't want us to lose in this event, and I want to make sure I hit on this point too. One thing that's starting to happen, which is fantastic, is we're starting to see visibility in pay across roles and standardization of pay. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is that even though, for roles like, hey, we pay 150 OTE, everybody's that's in this mid-market AE role, 150 OTE across the board. That doesn't mean you don't still negotiate. And my fear is that that's what's starting to happen as well. And I'm hearing this behind the scenes. So I know I'm going on a tangent, but it leads somewhere. But but it's really important to understand, like, even if there is a set bracket of pay, what else can you negotiate? I just dropped in a list in the comments here. I cheated and pulled it from one of my recent posts where I was talking about this topic. But these are all areas that you can talk about. Sign-on bonuses. Hey, like this is a real conversation I had with one company. I was like, we're about 20K OTE off. And they were like, well, 10 of that is variable and 10 is base. And I was like, true. And also I looked at I looked at their Salesforce instance. There are more reps pacing to quota at their team. So I have a higher likelihood of hitting that 20K if I do go over there. So I'm still banking on that number. So where can we fill in the blanks? And could we do that in the form of a signing bonus so that we stick to, your brackets that you have set forth? Can you fluff more into my education budget? Can we look at some of these other areas I listed? If I have friends who are moving right now that accepted new roles, so they negotiated their moving expenses and even like part of their rent expenses as well. So there are so many things if you just kind of like ask about, and especially when you're in that home stretch and you already have an offer in hand, they want you. Like I have to this day never heard of a situation in which someone asks for a little bit more and a company is like, we're actually going to cancel your candidacy because you are greedy. So I haven't seen situations like that, nor have I heard of them. You may get kind of redirects and information that says, this isn't going to be possible for our team. We can't make this work, but what about this? Another option is thinking about like equity as kind of a stopgap. If you're someone who, like me, has worked for startups for over 10 years, this is a really good space to play too. And especially when you're getting in early with these companies. For me personally, I won't offset like the base and commission that I need. Like I won't like go to a lower amount and trade it for equity, but I'll always negotiate equity in. And these smaller companies tend to be really giving when they do that. And it's not a guarantee that you're going to make money, but when it hits big. And those are 6-figure payouts. So it's worth it to just think about some of these other areas. I know I just danced around your question, but this list that I shared here, and another one that I would just highlight as well, and we can provide resources through Women in Sales for this because we have a contact that specializes in this, is the severance piece. With so many layoffs happening, think of it like a prenup for your career and frame it that way in a conversation. It's like, hey, I'm looking at the landscape. I'm understanding that there are changes that are impacting tech companies on a day-to-day basis. With that in mind, can we kind of talk about and basically set up a prenup for ourselves of what this would look like should that time come? And a lot of companies are going to respect you coming to the table with that. So again, feel free to post a question in the Women in Sales Slack community. We do have a resource that specializes in this, but I just wanted to make everyone aware that there are tons of areas you can think about outside of just money.
I love that. And Daisy, you had mentioned, I want to dig into this. I feel like we're talking around it, but what are some specific steps that you should take in negotiating your compensation plan, whether it's your overall offer and plan or details in your actual compensation plan? You mentioned about kind of showing up with some data. Maybe you weren't quite prepared the first time.
Yes. So my best advice is to always have a go-to answer. Because when you get that offer, whether it's email or on the phone, you don't know what you're getting. It could be higher, it could be lower. And you always want to have a go-to answer. So you're not going to be reactive and either accept too fast or you negotiate by saying, I want more money, not really thinking through, not really having data. So a go-to answer I always recommend is thanking them for their offer and asking when do they need to know by. And that way you're not giving anything. You're just like, hey, thank you. I appreciate the offer. I'm really excited about the job. When do you need a decision by? Okay. Can I get back to you then? And then you separate from the call, you're grateful. And that's when you have all the time, at least a couple of days or a couple of hours, whatever the case is, to get the data together of whatever you're trying to justify. So you need some time to digest it. You need some time to back up whatever you want to ask for. And so that's my best advice, is to have a backup answer, be clear, be confident, don't stutter, don't accept it too fast. And once you have that, you're going to be very confident in every negotiation. And then you do the research, you understand whatever they offered you, what do you want more of, what do you not care about? And just as Alexine and Christina have alluded to, like you start picking it apart based on what works for you. Because at the end of the day, you want to be happy and aligned or you're not going to be the best employee there. Once you have that and you can back it up with your experience, with data, that's when you go back to the table. And I'd say the first thing you do before you give your offer is to learn and understand. Just as salespeople, we always want to do discovery. We always want to listen. Those are the best sales experience I've had. And so same thing to your recruiter, a hiring manager. You just want to understand, ask questions, don't give a reaction yet. And you can pick up what they care about, what bands they have to work with, what levers they have. And that's when you put together a win-win negotiation to get ideally what you want here.
I love it. Oh, Christina, you add on?
Yeah, I love making other people speak first in a negotiation, because that's usually like, that's the old sales trick, is you say the thing and then you just wait very pleasantly. What that sounds like in a job negotiation, if it's going to go that direction, right? Because if you have negotiation breath when you're going into this, like, you can read that, right? So it's like, you get the offer. The first question I like to ask is there anything in this offer that is different than what we discussed, or something that I'm going to be seeing for the first time? Right. And so you let them say, like, well, the comp is a little bit lower. Okay, interesting. I'm going to need to take that into consideration. And well, we were able to add this. Oh, hey, why did you add that? Right. So by letting them say first, like, what we talked about, what am I about to see in this offer? That's the jumping off point. And now you can listen to their reply. And to Daisy's point, you don't have to respond to any of it, right? If they're like, well, the comp's a little bit lower, don't be like, but I wanted to hire. Be like, okay, I'm going to have to consider that. Right. So you're listening to what they're presenting you, and then you view that. And then when you come back, it's, when you made the offer, which I'm very grateful for, one of the first things that you mentioned was the comp was a little bit lower. And looking at the rest of the offer, I'm not sure I'm understanding where that's at. Help me understand XYZ. Right. So it just puts you in a power position to let them tell you first what you're going to see in the offer. And then you look at it with your own eyes and then respond back.
I love that. And shifting gears a little bit, Christina, in your leadership role now, where do you see reps still missing the mark in terms of negotiating on comp?
It's negotiating blindly, right? So like negotiating, because I'm a sales rep, and like, they're going to see that I want to negotiate, and I can feel it when they're doing that. And I'm like, what are you doing? And the other thing that I want to focus on is when you negotiate too much. And that might seem counterintuitive to the discussion that we are having, but Daisy kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier. You can't be the person that negotiates for, in this example, I'll use higher cash compensation. You can't be the person that negotiates for higher cash compensation. They give you less than you wanted, you accept, and then a couple months later, you go back and now you're pushing for more cash compensation. If you are not happy with the cash compensation that they are offering you, and you are not happy with their increased offer, that's the time to continue to negotiate that. If you say yes to an offer and you accept it, you are telling them, I am good, I am happy, I have what I need. And if you continue to go back and drip and say, like, well, I know that I got it. I know that I got a bump, but it wasn't enough, and I really wanted more. And I talked to somebody else who works here and they're getting paid more. Now I want to be paid more. You can't be the person that's continuing to go back and breadcrumbing, trying to get cash comp. You either do it all at once, or you wait until review periods to bring up the compensation. That is the appropriate time to do so. I've had instances at my own organization where, look, objectively, they're being underpaid compared to their counterparts, right? This has happened in almost every org that I've been in, and it happens, and it's not on purpose. Right? But when that happens, that individual is asking for more comp, and the business will give a little bit more comp. And then in this individual, the person said, like, great, thanks, I'll take that. A couple months later, like, hey, I'm still being underpaid compared to my, can I get a little bit more? We've had instances where 3-4 bumps, and they're still saying, I'm not getting paid enough. I'm not getting paid enough. And in my mind, I'm like, this is completely mismanaged. So negotiation is a powerful tool, but it can also really hurt your standing in an organization if you keep saying yes, ending the negotiation when you're actually not happy, and then waiting and continuing to bring it up. So there's a way to go about doing it.
Great point. Daisy, how about you now in a leadership role? Anything that you see reps doing where you feel like they're kind of missing the mark there and negotiating their plans?
Yes, not being prepared of why you deserve that raise. So come with reasons, make it easy for your manager to go back up. Because I think the important thing is you have to understand it's not your manager who has the power usually to just give you money like that. I'm sure they would love to, and that's a misconception. That's why a lot of reps just go direct to their manager. That's why they call frequently, because they're comfortable with their manager and they say, hey, I want this, I want that. But you have to think about what's going to help your manager, who has to go back to either a VP or the CFO or the CEO, depending on how big the company is. And your manager is not going to want to go back to a CFO 3-4 times a year for you. So that's why it's really important to go one time and have the data and reasoning and make your manager's job a lot easier to back why you should get paid more, essentially more than your peers, more than this, more than that, and what extra work you've done, you're going to do. Long story short, be prepared and have the data and make their life easier, because I'm sure they want to give you that raise, but you got to help you get that raise.
Awesome. This actually is a good segue, I think, to, in talking about leadership. What do you look for now as leaders? And I'm looking at Daisy and Christina. We're going to start there, and Alex can chime in when you want. How do you go about building an equitable plan? And especially when we talked a little bit about that standardization that's happening. And I think we have a stat from one of our reports that shows that 86% of companies are standardizing their compensation plans now, and that's up about 17% year over year. So what are some of the kind of elements that you look at? Maybe let's start thinking about territories or making quotas fair across the team. Christina, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually going to start a little bit broader because then we can drill into something like territories. And the main problem here, trying to standardize compensation is a practice that is meant to drive equality and equity. So it's a good thing. The problem is the denominator is so often not the same. And when we are trying to look for building equitable compensation plans that fit the work, that fit the territory, that fit the quota, you often can't look at overall metrics and averages in an industry and say, well, the average in this industry, because what goes into that? And so I find mistakes are made here because folks don't know what equation to be looking at to judge whether or not their compensation is fair. Right. I've heard instances where people say, oh, average AE comp is, 120,000 OTE. And then I've heard others that are like, no, when I look at it, it's 220 OTE. And I'm like, both of you could be right. Both of you were wrong. So what do we look at? We look at the years of experience. We look at the industry. We look at the average deal cycle. So how long does it take to actually close a deal? We look at the ASP, so the average size of that deal. We look at the size of the quota. We look at the deal velocity that we are expecting. We look at the number of product SKUs that we have and the opportunity for initial lands and expansions. We look at our churn rates. We look at our revenue retention rates. We look at our value retention rates. And a combination of all of those things are going to determine where we put our overall OTE comp and even down to the split. Right. So if you have the kind of product where it's a one-time sell and then done, you might want to have a higher base compensation because the opportunities for expansion don't exist where they would with a company that has more opportunities, more products, more SKUs, right? Are you a land and expand model or are you a full cycle AE model, right? So if I'm a land model, my compensation package should look very different than if I'm responsible for landing the logo and also expanding it because my opportunity for warm revenue is so much higher. So I can take on a larger quota, which means I can take on a larger OTE. So the problem is a lot of companies when they're trying to do this don't really understand the nuance of how you build a fair and equitable plan. And so they go, the average is here. We pay the average. And it's like, compared to others, you actually don't, right? And that's a really hard thing to come over. So I advise any company that is looking to do this to really do the work with an outside company if you need to, not to say what is fair in general, but look at our organization, compare it properly, get the right denominator. And also, worst case, consider the quota multiple, right? It's like, your quota should be 3 to 4x your comp in a fully ramped organization. Now, I'm going to say that also with an asterisk because depending on some of the nuances I just said, that might not make sense. But in general, that's a guiding light that you start with and then you try to disprove it. It's a hard exercise and it changes and it evolves. And that's, I think, where a lot of companies get caught up.
Yeah, that is such a good point on make sure the denominator is even and make sure you're actually starting from an equitable playing field. If you're comparing apples and oranges, you're not going to be starting from the right place. Daisy, I'm really interested to hear your perspective. How do you go about building equitable comp plans? Where do you start?
Yeah, so +1 to everything Christina said. She really threw it all out there. That's amazing.
I just 8-miled you. Good luck.
I got nothing else to say here. But I think first, yes, it's very important to make sure you evaluate apples to apples. Are we in the same playing field, same industry, all that fun stuff? I think as a leader, it's important to take your prior experience with a grain of salt, because whatever company you were before, yes, it's great to know all those conversations, but that company is a different industry, different ARR model, all those different things. And so you can't always just bring your past experience and expect like, oh, we did this, reps were happy, I'm bringing this to this company. You have to think about your company for what it is and where it's going, what's valued. I think it's also a partnership. As a sales leader, yes, it's important you have strong comp plans you believe in, you can back up, but you have to be in tight partnership with finance because it has to make sense for your company to not go bankrupt should every single rep blow out the accelerators. Let's say worst case scenario for our finance team is every rep has hit the maximum amount and we're paying big paychecks. Did the amount they close still make sense? So we're thriving and we want that. So getting in full alignment so that if everyone breaks the accelerators, that everyone in the company is happy and rooting for the same team there. If it's not making sense and the company might go bankrupt because everyone's hitting accelerators, then you got to redo that plan. So the plan's got to make sense for the reps as well as the financial standings of the company, because at the end of the day, we only win if the company wins. I think it's also really important that when you're designing comp plans is to make sure that you feel confident conveying that. I always think as a sales leader perspective, I want to make sure it's transparent, but let's say if every single person in the company, including other division, knows that comp plan, what each rep is making, I want to be confident as a leader that I can back it up with data. This comp plan looks like this because they have the most inbound traction, so they're going to get paid a little less than this comp plan. This comp plan, you have to self-source a lot of your deals, and we only have a little bit of deals here, and it's very complicated. That's why they have this comp plan. This comp plan is a net new market. We've never touched it, and that's why we give them extra bonuses. Whatever it means, you have to be able to back it up as if every single person in your company knows what everyone makes. And that's the best way to be transparent and also feel confident in your plan too.
I really love that the transparency actually means showing the reasons why. It doesn't just mean showing the numbers. It actually means explaining the context and then even tying that context to the overall business objectives, Daisy. So I really love that. My colleague Kelly has been dropping in a few resources in the chat, and one of them is a Comp Trends report that we publish annually, and we'll be talking more about that collaboration between finance and sales leaders to design the right plan. So I love hearing you say that. That last part that you touched on in terms of transparency is a really interesting one. And, even though we're talking about as a leader, how do you build an equitable plan? Alexine, I'd almost love to hear your perspective from your days as an AE in, what did transparent compensation look like at some of the companies you're at? And what do you think are some ways that a leader could create compensation transparency across the team?
I'm going to be really honest in this answer that it involves a lot of self-advocacy. Like I especially working solely at startups, this was not like readily available information. And I bumped my head more times than I can count. And I can tell you, I was thinking about this while Daisy and Christina were talking, that there were 3 areas where I would get caught and where the plan would end up going awry. And so those 3 areas that I would say would be the segment that you're in. So whether it's enterprise versus mid-market versus, growth, whatever you want to call it, territory, like, geo territory. And then the third is the lead flow. And I'm going to, the lead flow one, the question isn't like, am I going to get inbounds? Like no leader wants like the person, like it's okay to like understand if that's happening, but don't make that like the center of your interview process because it doesn't come off really nicely. What I mean when I talk about segment is that this has happened to me more than once where I helped build enterprise for the first time with companies. I was the very first enterprise rep in the door. And so what happened was all of the other reps were in SMB roles and they were really fast, quick deal cycles, like, 30 days, 60 days, and they had a revenue number attached to that. So when I would join these organizations, what they would do, to your point, Christina, for whatever reason, the math became 3x whatever the SMB target was. And it was just this like magic number that no one could quantify but that was the number. And so my quota would be 3x what an SMB rep would have. Problem with this is no proven success in enterprise, no logos to show for. Also, there's just so much that would go into that. And it's just such a tough, the segment piece is just key. Territory is a big one as well. And this is one where I would be remiss not to mention this. For women, for many years, like some of us have also not been given access to certain territories. I was told on numerous occasions, New York has to go to one of the guys on the team. It's going to be like a guy's guy territory. Like they need a dude in there. And so I wouldn't get access to certain territories. And this happened at 2+ companies. And those were the largest grossing territories. So now my quota is not only based on the geographic territory that someone else used, but now I have to make that work in like Oklahoma and like and all these like random states. And it hasn't been proven based on the segment I'm in. And then the last piece is when you kind of like quantify quota based on lead flow. So I think that was Christina who made the point, but when a team like an SMB team, for example, is just getting fed inbounds like 75% of the time, and now you baked in a number based off that number isn't rooted in outbound. It's not rooted in reality. So when you try to start a new segment or put reps in a different segment and you just use the math and you multiply it by 3, it doesn't work because there isn't the same quantity of inbound. And when you're building a new territory and a new segment, oftentimes there's no inbound. And so you're really going at it cold. The deal cycles are 3x the time. So as I kind of put all this together, I think the biggest piece is having these honest conversations and building a level of trust. The last full-time manager that I had, his name's Josh. I always talk about him. We had that level of trust during the interview process. We spent hours before I accepted the role officially to come onto his team. And he was very honest. Like, these are the spots where we're not today. These are numbers that are a question mark right now. I don't know if these are numbers yet because you're first into this territory. And then we went through other things and he was really honest and we poked holes in everything. And it helped me determine what my comp was going to be. And so that's where I think about like equity is, how do I have those conversations and how do I find the leaders that are willing to dig in and just be really honest about like, we don't know what we don't know. And so you're going to be taking a shot on us and we'll be doing the same. And we'll make sure that your pay is fair and it meets what you need. But just know that there are some question marks and you're walking into a tough territory. But if you feel like rolling up your sleeves, let's do this.
Boom.
And I did.
Awesome. I love it. And Daisy, I saw you nodding along there as well. Was there anything that you wanted to follow up on in what Alexine said in terms of, getting into making sure that you're transparent and equitable around some of those components, whether it's territories or segments?
Yes. At the end of the day, as we all know in sales, territories and segments and processes do help determine the flow you get to get to that OT number. That's why that piece is so critical, because a big OT sounds amazing. That's what a lot of recruiters send to in mail. Like, this is the OT, this is the OT. Without digging deep into the territories, the process, the leads, and the close rates and things like that, that's when you're in trouble of whether or not you can achieve that or be well below it, or maybe you can be well above it because you fully understood how that worked at the company. And I think from a leadership perspective, the biggest thing to make sure is that's fair and equitable as possible is to do a regular assessment of everyone's compensation and competence and what they're delivering. Because a lot of times there's a lot of turnover. A lot of the reps, not a lot, but at least some of the reps aren't reps you've hired and you've given the raises to and you've given the initial compensation to. And so there's bound to be inequity of things that don't make sense because you weren't controlling the whole process. And even if you were, there's still human error and all that fun stuff. So I think from a sales leadership perspective, it's critical to do regular evaluations and assessments of the comp, of the competence, of everything that's going on, so that you can make that clear decision and path forward to make it as equitable as possible as time continues.
I love that. Yeah. So what are those regular checkpoints and how do you, we're never done, right? Compensation is not static. Our comp plans are not static. So how do we also as leaders continue to have those evaluation points? Well, as we think about evaluation points, let's talk. We've had a lot of self-reflection in the discussion today so far, especially starting out with going from softy to savage. I have to bring that up one more time, of course. Let's wrap things up in our discussion today, talking a little bit about confidence and competence. Can you share a few tips? All three of you are so confident, so well poised. I can see how I get the sense of how you would negotiate your comp plan. Can you talk a little bit about what are some tips for presenting confidently and negotiating confidently? What are some things to keep in mind?
First thing that I will say is sometimes doing it creates the confidence. If you are waiting to feel confident before you do anything, you're going to be waiting a really, really long time. And so it does take a little bit of bravery to have these conversations, especially if you are negotiating a job offer when you've been laid off or you are out of work. It is terrifying to not just take the offer because you have yourself to feed and pay for. You might have your family, you may have significant others. You may have been out of work for a really long time because this economy is awful for being out of work. And the easy thing to do is take the offer when you get it and worry about the rest later because you're in a state of desperation, you're in a state of panic. And especially if you've been laid off or you've been fired or you've been out of work, or even if you're just leaving an organization because you're unhappy, your confidence is low, right? So you're not going in like, listen, I am top dog. I just got fired, but I'm top dog, right? It's like it gets in your head. And I know that. And that's the real human thing. So my advice is you don't have to go into that and be like, I'm super confident. I got this. But what you have to do is say, I am confident that I can do this. I am confident that I can have this conversation. I'm confident that I'm asking for the right things because I have done the research. Most companies, by the time they get to the point where they're making you an offer, you negotiating is not going to ruin the offer, right? They don't have 5 other sales reps. They're like, we're going to make an offer to you, but if you negotiate, we're going to go next down the line. I can promise you, I've interviewed over 500 sales reps in my lifetime. And I promise you, never once has there been a situation when they've negotiated and it's lost them the deal. It's been things after that. So if you do it the right way, you present yourself with poise, you be a human being, you can be confident that you can do this. You can, and you can.
Yes. And I just want to add, I think, especially in sales, I think that if someone does not negotiate it, I look at that in even more of a negative light because we are in sales and we have to negotiate as part of the job. So it's important you negotiate, but how you do it is what I really assess someone as they negotiate too. And I think that negotiation doesn't just start or stop at compensation or in sales in general. It's part of everyone's day-to-day life. When you negotiate with your partner on where to eat or what to do, when you negotiate with your family, your friends, and it doesn't have to be this scary word where you're winning and someone's unhappy. I think the best way to think about it is it's a win-win solution and how you articulate that so both parties are happy. And if you apply that to your day-to-day life, you just get better and better, and then you build that confidence. So by the time you do it for compensation, then you feel very comfortable doing it too.
I love that. So use the elements in your daily life that help build your confidence to build that confidence in negotiating your comp.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm very much aligned with you, Christina. Like the only way out is through. And that's always been like my methodology. I don't have like a pretty way of like, oh, I did this and had this coach. Like sometimes I just fumbled my way through and like hit my head on the brick wall enough times where finally I got comfortable with something. Like that's often my approach. And as I think about like behind the scenes, especially in moments where I'm feeling beat up or like I definitely get tender sometimes. Like people say a mean thing and it like gets to me still to this day. In those moments, it is really good to have like, I have like a little cheesy affirmations folder. I literally am ordering a box now for my office to put like letters people send me so I can go back and read through them now and things like that to remind me. And then also just reviewing kind of like my actual numbers, the data, the awards, the accolades. Like sometimes you just have to like look back and think, if I wasn't me and I was talking to someone else and coaching them, like imagine how much softer and kinder I would be to that individual. Like I would be just hyping them up. And you just have to have that same conversation with yourself and just say, you know what, maybe I did get knocked down. Maybe I got laid off. Maybe I got fired. Maybe everything fell apart, but I'm still qualified. I'm still good at what I do. And I still have a place in this field. And those are the conversations where you have to start having them with yourself. And if you're in a place where you can't do that, then there are communities now. There are places where you can have those conversations and other people will lift you up and they'll help do that work with you. But the only way out is through.
Alexi, when we were talking earlier this week, you also mentioned something else that you work on, which I think is a really cool idea to help build that confidence in knowing where you want to go. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of a personal business plan?
Yes. So the reason this exists in the first place is because I didn't know how to ask for a promotion. I didn't know how to ask for money. And I had a background in entrepreneurship. I went through a program at Purdue. And so I knew how to write business plans. And I was like, how do I marry these two worlds? So what I did was my very first year in sales, I wrote a 20-page business plan, and it outlined on page 1, it was like, by X date, I want to be in a team lead role. And here is the earnings I want to earn by Y date. And I just had this like straight up, the first page you open, that's what you see. And then in the following pages, I created charts. I was like, here's how I'm going to here's the pathway to the revenue. Here's my stretch goal. Here's how I'm going to get to those numbers. Here are the activities I'm going to do. Here's the education. So I had different sections that were like, these are the books I'm going to read. These are the events that I'm going to attend. This is the work that I'm going to do behind the scenes. I'm going to seek out a mentor internally. I'm going to seek out a mentor externally. And I created a pathway to where it almost made it awkward for someone not like, how are you going to say no to one of your reps with a 20-page business plan if they outline like, this is all the stuff I'm going to do. I'm putting it in front of you. And if we talk at the end of the year and I'm not here, shame on you at that point. So that was my way of getting through the discomfort of not knowing how to negotiate. And then what I did immediately after was took that same business plan and met with executives in my team. And it was very ballsy at the time, but I would go to our C-suite and I was like, would anybody be willing to review my business plan I created? And ironically, the very first person that gave me feedback and ended up mentoring me was my CFO at the time, who I'd never talked to. And he was like, what is this document? And I was like, it's okay. I know you, like, a lot of people don't really want to read through it. I get it. Like, you're busy, whatever. And I got an invite like a week later and he's like, let's go to lunch. And I'd like to sit down and go through this plan with you. And I have some feedback if you're open to it. And so I got to that lunch and I was like, I am about to just be rained upon with compliments and showered with good stuff. And he just had like page by page, he was marking up. He's like, you don't have a date here. What date at which are you going to hit this target? When are you going to do this? How do you get to this target? And he actually went through. And then at the end, he's like, if you're open to it, I'd like to meet once a quarter and I'd like to take you under my wing and mentor you. And that was my first mentor, was the CFO. And sometimes it just takes being gutsy like that and asking and putting the work in ahead of time. And you'll be surprised who shows up for you. It's the people you least expect. And it can be a really magical thing. So yeah, my business plan was my early negotiation tactic, my way of forcing my own promotion, which worked. So
I love it. I love it. I know we are getting close to the end of the hour. There's been a good amount of chatter in the live chat, but I did want to open it up for any questions from the audience if there's anything we haven't touched on through the conversation today.
Oh, Sarah, we have a list. So if you go to the Q&A tab, we have a meaty list of questions, some of which we may have to address post-event.
Okay, let's dig in then. All right. We have so many. Any that stand out to the group here? I know we won't be able to get through all of them. I guess let's dig in. Maybe we'll try this one. How do you determine whether your quota is fair if you were the first rep hired to build a new region? I think we touched on it a little bit, but
I mean, I can answer. It's likely a guess, and that's okay. They always are. This is where you just kind of go back down to the basic factor of like 3 or 4x quota to your OTE. And then you ask questions around like, what is my ramp time? So I would say it's less about the OTE and it's more about the ramp time. It's more about the quota. It's making sure those are in line. It's not uncommon for especially startups and first AEs to get like an extravagant number as a quota. Like, all right, your first year is going to be 1 million and your OTE is going to be 180. And you're like, it's like, if it's 180, I kind of feel like I should have maybe like a $500,000 quota, right? So it's like being able to understand those things and how they play into it. And then you can ask the question of like, look, if the quota is $1 million, what is the average sale price of a deal? And what is your close rate? right? Like how quickly can you close a deal? And if the ASP is $50,000 and it takes you 4 months to close a deal, how am I just starting with a ramp supposed to hit that number in 1 year, right? So it's being able to talk about those things, because sometimes the company is not trying to screw you over. They may not know and may not be thinking about, so they're setting the quota at what they think or want to be possible. A lot of times I will see companies set the quota at the company plan, or they build too much of a buffer. So the company plan is, okay, if we could do 500,000 this year, that'd be great. So let's set the rep quota at like 1 million, because then no matter what, right, we're going to hit, right? And so you have to be able to step in and say, well, okay, look, if our average deal size is $50,000 and the average velocity is 2 deals per month, then you do the math. I just started, I'm having to learn. It's going to take me 4 to 5 months minimum to ramp. I'm just calling out now that there's going to be a miss there. So like, if that's going to be what the quota is, let's talk about what my accelerators are going to be. Let's talk about what my job protection is going to be. Let's talk about what my bonuses are going to look like. Or, hey, if you want to give me a crazy quota, let's run at it, guarantee my comp. Give me an MBO, right? Guarantee my comp for 6 months so that I can worry about building this pipeline and business for you. And I can try to go hit that quota, but I can't have my livelihood tied to your guests. Right now, you may not come at it as strong as I just did, because that's just my, you're gonna be a little more like, let's work together on that. But ultimately, that's what you're thinking, right? Is understanding, how do we get to this number and how do I negotiate that?
That's great.
For these other questions, we will I'll round these up on the back end somehow. And what we'll do is we'll pop these into our compensation and negotiations channel in Slack, in the Women in Sales Slack, which I linked in the comments, and we'll answer them offline.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for all of the questions. Sorry, our conversation was so rich. We didn't get to tackle all of them right now. And on that note, Alexine, do you want to talk a little bit more about how people can follow up with Women in Sales and continue to engage and get other resources?
Yes, I know we're just at time. So just real quick here, we do have our Slack community. The places to stay in touch with us are Instagram, Slack, website, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn is like your main meeting ground. You'll see all of our upcoming events, content collaborations, and we just launched our 100 Powerful Women in Sales list for the 2nd year in a row. I believe some of our participants on today's panel are on that. And so make sure to check that out. It's a great resource. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM me directly on Slack or LinkedIn, and I'm happy to help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And just a quick reminder too, for QuotaPath, you can just visit quotapath.com. My colleague Kelly has dropped in a few resources, but whether you're looking for a compensation calculator, you want to dig into the new Learn Center that we're launching next week, so August 14th, a brand new Learn Center, or catch up on any of our top blogs. It's a great place to go for resources, or see how your comp plan's doing by starting a free trial at quotapath.com. Thank you, Daisy, Christina, Alexine, for such a rich discussion today. I hope everyone has a great day and gets excited to continue their comp negotiations.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
Sarah. Appreciate it. Bye.